The following transmission is a conversation with Lawrence McNamara, creator, lead writer, editor, and narrator of the MODUS Files, a Fallout story podcast. After falling in love with and exploring the Boston Commonwealth, Lawrence found himself in Appalachia, where his love of the Fallout franchise only continued to grow. As time went on, he and others like him began to construct this character-driven narrative that would eventually become the MODUS Files, an exploration of survival, idealism, and good people doing bad things for the sake of what they perceive as the greater good. Over the course of our conversation, we'll talk at length about the MODUS Files and its themes, the use of redemption in storytelling, and the Fallout fandom's most infamous faction, the centerpiece of this story, the Enclave. I am follower Toshi, and this is the Atomcast. If you enjoy this episode, be sure to follow for future episodes and consider subscribing to our Patreon for early access to new uploads to help keep episodes ad-free and to improve the quality and frequency of transmission. As always, links to our Patreon as well as guest socials can be found in the description. And be sure to leave a comment recommending creators that you'd like to see as future guests. Without further ado, Lawrence McNamara.
I mean, it's tough. And I think that the way I look at it is that if you spent the time to put out content, that should be respected. And if you don't enjoy someone's content or if you have a disagreement with them, there are ways to handle that. I think some of the vitriol that we see online is just people really that knee-jerk reaction and they want to say something. Whereas if they were actually able to take a step back and either not say anything, or if they didn't like something, there are ways to say it, to be able to say, you know, it could have been done differently. You could have done it this way, or I didn't like this particular topic. Maybe you should do this topic. There does need to be, I think, more thoughtful conversation.
There does. I can't remember. I think no, it was on it was on Once Upon a Wasteland. I can't remember which episode, but I talked with because he's been on the podcast a couple of times.
Yeah, Brad.
Brad and Brad and then Vitriol. She was on the second time that Brad came on. But one of the things that we talked about in the first time Brad came on was like it was one comment that got put that was on one of their episodes. I can't remember what, but it was basically like, "Oh, lesbians in Fallout, like that's not realistic" or something like that. And it's like that's such a weird comment. That's such a weird comment to make. Like it's not constructive. It's not criticism because it's not like serious, a serious critique. It's just kind of like self-reporting in a way. And it's like, why would like what does that add to any sort of conversation? It's like you could ask Brad. He probably has he probably has it like framed somewhere as like, a motivational. That's right. He did put it on a t-shirt. Oh, I forgot about that. Oh, that's so funny. But yeah, the comment section just isn't the best. Like I tell anybody who's all, sometimes, people come to me and they'll ask for like advice, like, hey, what would be your advice for like, starting a YouTube channel or something like that. And it's always just ignore the comments, to an extent. You do kind of want to be a little bit present in the comment section and stuff. But for the most part, like ignore the comments because maybe not 9 times, but like, 7 times out of 10, it's not going to be anything worth, digging into and finding genuine conversation with.
Exactly. So again, I always try to keep it on there were years ago when I used to engage people online and I realized it was a losing proposition. So I try to reserve my comments for particular situations and try not to engage if it's just not going to be productive.
Yeah. I did the opposite. I had a history of getting into fights in the comment section, which I don't know. It's one of those things where it kind of like, it hones a skill, but it's a skill that you don't really want to have. Like
Right.
I feel like debate is like a good skill to have, but it's one of those things that's like it's sort of like a means to an end, but that end is like another step. So it's just kind of like, being able to articulate your point and everything is good, but when it's like when a debate turns into like an argument, then it's just like, okay, you're just getting better at like being hostile in a sense.
Right. No, I get it. I totally get it. I mean, and it's a fine line that we walk sometimes, especially as creators, because that does generate interest in some cases, but in other cases you turn people off. So it is like I said, it's a fine line.
It really is. So for anybody who might not be, completely aware, because I think it because it's always a little strange whenever I have somebody who's like a storytime podcaster on the show, because I think more so than anything else, maybe like not even like a Fallout specific thing, but more so like a video game specific thing, you never think of sort of like additional media on top of it that's fan driven, that's like specifically like radio drama, like the Chad Fallout podcast or Once Upon a Wasteland or any of these other fantastic podcasts out there, like the Modus Files. You don't like, they're always really well written, but you never really think of audio dramas in the same vein as many other fan driven creative projects when related to video games. So for anybody who may not be aware of what the scope of the story is for the Modus Files, as the creator, what would your elevator pitch be to get somebody up to speed and up to knowledge on what the story is about?
Wow, that's an excellent question. And you're asking somebody that writes 200-page scripts. So let me see if I can distill this down to like the very heart of it, which is every villain is the hero of their own story. And in the world of Fallout 76, we have the residents of the vault who have entered into Appalachia, and they are both good and bad, and they are also very gray. And our story follows a group of these survivors as they enter into the world of this post-war Appalachia, facing monsters, and they find themselves at the White Spring, this old resort, which just so happened to be also a pre-war government bunker containing an artificial intelligence called MODUS. And through this, the eyes of MODUS and our characters, we begin to explore all of these secrets that are starting to rise to the surface in Appalachia. So we find ourselves fighting the Scorched and the Scorched Plague. There are also deeper, darker secrets within the region that we begin to uncover. So it really is a story driven around, I would say, the foundation of what Fallout 76 was, but really taking it in a direction where we're seeing it through the eyes of characters that are very morally ambiguous, that are, in many cases, what you would consider to be the bad guys. And we've done that through the past 3 seasons. The first season was very much focused on the Scorched and the Scorched Beast Queen, and really beginning to discover what Appalachia was all about around the foundation of MODUS. In the second season, we expanded our story. We began to see things like the Encrypted, the Imposter's Sheep Squatch, the Blood Eagles, because people were coming back into Appalachia. And then in our third season, we begin to really discover the true secret of Appalachia, where there is another hidden faction that has really been kind of guiding a lot of what we've seen. So they've been under the surface. So it's really this very long form story, adding in a lot of characters from the game, adding in characters that we have created, and really creating this full blown story of the beginning of Appalachia, and what we're exploring now is really the end of Appalachia. So it's this idea of tying up one complete story, which ultimately will tie into the larger Fallout universe. So I know that was quite long for an elevator pitch, but that is really kind of the scope of what the Modus Files has become, which is this very large, sprawling story, but very much still character driven.
Well, luckily for you, we were going to the top of the Empire State Building, so it's a long elevator ride.
Right.
So like I think because I've always sort of thought of the Modus Files conceptually as interesting, because I think that a lot of people usually when they see a lot of like casual internet denizens, will often when they think of like more so audio story dramas, unless they're like big into like like audiobooks and stuff like that. Usually when they think of audio stories, especially with a title like Modus Files, they'll usually think of like like SCP content, or
Hmm.
like the Backrooms, or other analog horror stories, or analog stories that are more so about like creatures, or caricatures, or individuals, which I guess technically all stories are about creatures, characters, or individuals, but more so with like, because I remember when I first started hearing about the Modus Files, I'm like, oh, interesting. Is that going to be like from a narrative perspective? Is that going to be more like the SCP Foundation, where it's like like research documents that are being like read to the listener? Is it going to be more of a full on story thing? Is it going to be from like the POV, the perspective? Are we going to be observing stories and events from the viewpoint of Modus, or are we sort of the invisible camera, the wandering stage, observing the actions of the characters, in um, in sort of you know like taking in more of the Modus Files, like listening to the audio dramas and stuff. It seems that it's more story focused, but sorry, not story focused, character focused, and we're seeing the actions of the characters play out in quote unquote real time as a more proper story. We're not being told the information after the fact, like the SCP projects, and we're not seeing it through the eyes of Modus as like an all-seeing observer. When you were sort of coming up with this idea of the Modus Files, what was the intended perspective that you wanted to tell the story in? Obviously, by the name Modus Files, there's a very clear connection and correlation to the artificial intelligence Modus, which in Fallout 76 is basically like the last remaining mind of the Enclave, essentially. And during the course of the game, if the player interacts with Modus, slowly, middle, they become an Enclave member, effectively. But in the terms of the story, what was the original vision for creating this story and attaching it to Modus and the Enclave?
So that's great, actually, and it does. It's kind of interesting because you hit on some things that I actually considered when I was first fleshing things out at the beginning. Because when this started, I had no intention of actually creating a larger story or even a podcast. It actually all started with just a character guide. I was looking at my character in the game. I started thinking about what her motivations were. I was thinking about her interactions with the world. So a lot of what I wrote first were kind of third person perspectives of holotapes or situations that she might find herself in where she was interacting with Modus, or she was out in the field and she was doing things that we would find in the game. It was really just more to flesh out this Colonel Valeria as a character. Who is she? What motivates her? How does she act? Just really, that's all it was at the beginning. And as I got into it, it really started to resonate with me that there was a larger story here. And ironically enough, there was a question that came up while I was playing Fallout 76 that really started to drive the narrative. and I was reading through some of the lore, and we were going through the whole Scorched Plague and Scorched Beast Queen quest line. And one of the things that they said in the lore was that FEV infected creatures are immune to becoming scorched. So if you're a super mutant, you can't be infected with the scorched virus. So I was like, okay, that's cool. And then I ran into a scorched mutant hound, and I was like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. They're FEV creatures. Why are they scorched? And of course, being a writer's brain like I have, I started to think about, well, why would it be? Is there something there that we need to investigate? Is this part of the story? So just from that little genesis of an idea, I suddenly started to build out this idea of a plot, and that plot suddenly got bigger. I love the idea of Modus only because if you think about it, because think about us as Vault residents leaving 76 and going into Appalachia. For 25 years, we had been fed Vault Tech propaganda, which is functionally Enclave propaganda, which is just like, hey, we're the best and the brightest. Vault Tech's going to save all of us. We're going to rebuild the country. It's going to be fantastic. We go out into Appalachia, and things are all messed up. Everybody's dead. The Scorched is there. We have a big problem. Suddenly, we find Modus. He's got a bunker. He's got a production facility. He has power armor. He has weapons. So it would make sense that our characters would be like, Modus is a wonderful ally. Here's somebody who can protect us. He can arm us. And this whole idea of an enclave, this would make a ton of sense to our characters. So tying that into figuring out why these Scorched mutant hounds existed led me to create this story that originally wasn't going to be this 60 or 70 voice actors and this whole big long thing. But it just really got me to want to tell this story. And then being, again, the writer, I wanted to also narrate some. So I'm a big fan of audiobooks. So I wanted this to be very much of a combination of an audiobook plus an audio drama. So it's not just one person reading, even though that's originally what the first episode ended up being for me, is just sitting in front of the microphone and talking. It really led me to create this larger story, really built around the idea of these are characters in Fallout 76. They are acting like and going through the events that we would go through. They're seeing the locations. We throw in the Overseer. We throw in Vault 79. And as we went along, this story just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I started getting feedback from people who were listening to the podcast who were like, wow, I went to Sugar Grove, or I just bought the Encrypted, and it was just like you described it in the podcast. And wow, I'm getting a new sense of what is all in this game. So the game and the podcast started feeding off of each other, and it just continued to allow me to get new ideas and really just continue to expand the story. So that's kind of really how it came about, was just this genesis of an original idea. Now, if I roll it all the way back, none of this would have happened if I hadn't been playing Fallout 76. And I came back to my camp one day, and a couple of walls had been destroyed because I gotten attacked by a mob or two. And as I was going to repair the walls, this other player shows up, and he's got area chat on. And he's just talking to himself, and he's talking about, hey, this is a really cool Enclave camp. I really like the Enclave. I'm going to fix his walls. And this guy was named Tim. He and I got talking, and suddenly I started sharing my ideas with him, and he introduced me to his character, which turned out to be Lilith, who is like our number 2 character.
Mm-hmm.
And that adding to the Scorched Mutant Hound, added to this idea of creating a story around our characters, led to me writing this massively expansive story, which has turned into 96 episodes and 9,000 pages of scripts. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell on how all of this really came together, because it was the Modus Files just made sense because Modus was going to be such a central character. It's also a very catchy title. But it's morphed over time. And I looking back the 5 years that we've been doing this, I never expected that we would be where we are today. This has been as much of a surprise to me as I think to anybody, but I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish thus far.
I remember back when it actually kind of feels weird to say it this way, but I remember back when World of Warcraft was like the most popular thing in existence, right? It was like the peak video game, like the essence of like the culmination of all like video game technology. And with each new DLC that they put out, because Blizzard was so unimaginably good at marketing their DLCs. I like, because they put out like basically like small cinematic features just as like, this is the trailer for our DLC. Each one felt like a big deal. There was a new story element that was being introduced. There was new races, new classes, stuff like that. And it always had this like great deal of presence and this great deal of weight and drama behind it. Successful marketing. But then, like, because DLCs with MMOs, they're just like, oh, here's new content, here's new things, here's new stuff, yada yada yada, blah blah blah. I can't remember which DLC it was. I want to say like maybe the 4th or the 5th DLC, but eventually they came out with the Cataclysm DLC, which, to simplify it, introduced this big giant dragon who's like a big huge threat to the the entire world basically. And with his arrival, a lot of things on the map actually changed. Entire locations were massively different than they were before. For me, this was my first introduction to basically the concept of like a living world. One that with Fallout 76, we saw Bethesda try to emulate to an extent, more so with how the player base interacts with each other and is able to, tell their own stories and create their own content and things like that. But over time, we have seen Appalachia, evolve and change, not in, the more dramatic way of entire areas being changed, but, we've seen things change. We saw Foundation and the crater pop up. We saw, new locations arise. The Mothman cult has been, spreading out a little bit. We've seen new areas with the Shenandoah Valley, and in especially since you've been doing this for 5 years at this point, with all of the things that like are constantly changing and getting added to Fallout 76, not so much as to an extreme extent as the Enclave, because even though they have added new stuff with how they've evolved the White Springs, it's still there's stuff going on the in the background that we're not very privy to. But with how Fallout 76 has been evolving and changing constantly, how has that sort of helped to shape the direction, or perhaps even completely upheave the direction that you're trying to take the MODUS Files in, plan to take the story in? And how are you adapting to that? Adapting to this live service game that continues to evolve and change its story?
So I made a conscious decision probably after the Brotherhood of Steel arrived, when they had the Steel Dawn and the Steel Rain DLCs.
Mm-hmm.
And that was about the time that I was continuing to really write, and I wanted to incorporate those. So I'd really used all of the DLCs up to that point to add flavor to the story, add new NPCs. We did actually add the Brotherhood. Actually, funny enough, Vitriol actually joined our podcast as Scribe Valdez. So we've had a lot of crossover actually between us and Once Upon a Wasteland, because it just made sense that our stories were, I wouldn't say they necessarily exist in the exact same world, but they're very, very adjacent to each other. And as Bethesda continued to add content, it helped me flesh out the story more. The irony, of course, is that I knew and know how this story ends. So the MODUS Files, at least in its current iteration, the story of Appalachia does have an ending. And we wanted to explain, part of that was thinking back why does nobody in Fallout 3 or Fallout 4 talk about Appalachia? Why isn't it something that like people know about? So I wanted to solve that particular problem. So I used pretty much everything up until I would say Steel Rain. Things that have happened since then. So Skyline Valley is not actually included in what I'm writing about, but it has informed some of just some of the texture that I've written. What I would say is it gives me the opportunity to use Fallout 76 as my own sandbox, and I can tell my own story. And I think of it as a butterfly effect. The moment that we stepped out of Vault 76, the story started to change. So Bethesda had one idea of the direction that they wanted to go. I had a completely different idea of how I wanted to go. So there's just a parting of the ways. We still exist within the same world. We make use of the same locations, but my characters are experiencing, quote unquote, the game in a way that makes sense in the way that I write and the story that I want to tell. I think it's a wonderful canvas. That's what Fallout 76 is. And for all of us that do content, you know, Ken does Chad, Brad, Once Upon a Wasteland, I do Modus Files. We're all telling different stories, but we're all starting from the same point. So it's great to see different perspectives. And I like to try to keep things grounded. I know that Ken, with the Chad podcast, really likes to add a lot of comedy. He very much adheres to kind of the idea that this is actually a game world. Once Upon a Wasteland was telling very much the story between Brad and, or not Brad, sorry, Brad was telling the story between Odessa and his character Beth, and what that was going to look like. I keep things very grounded. This is very much something that a player, if they were actually in that situation, they wouldn't see it as a game. I try to keep it very much as real life as possible, meaning people die. There are large scale conflicts. There are other things that I add to it just to give it that gritty feel. So it's almost like a combination of like what you would see like in a Call of Duty game, mix in some Tom Clancy, also the grittiness of Fallout, with also, you know, a bit of humor as well. I always got to be humorous, you know, Lilith getting bored and eating somebody. But you know, but again, kind of going back to the original question, it's using Fallout 76 as a canvas, taking as much from it as I can to tell a really compelling story, and things that I don't want or I don't need, I just kind of ignore. And that's the joy of telling my own story.
What with because I mean we've talked and you've mentioned a couple times you know, the other podcasts that are set in Appalachia, the Chad podcast, Once Upon a Wasteland, and then, you know, the Modus Files. We're seeing a lot of and you know, it could be the fact that I'm more so ignorant of the of, you know, additional bits of content out there, which if you're listening to this at home and you know somebody who you think would be a great guest, leave a comment. I need to talk to people. But and again, it could be the fact that audio dramas connected, or fan driven audio dramas connected to video game properties, is sort of like a niche, you know? But within the scale and the scope of Fallout, you know, there's a lot of people that still have a lot of criticism when it comes to Fallout 76 as a game. A lot of that is more so directed at Bethesda, as we were talking about at the you know, earlier. Some criticism isn't really criticism; it's just, you know, commentary.
Right.
And you know, a lot of people will like say bad things about Fallout 76 when really they're not so much interested in talking about Fallout 76 as they are talking about, you know, Bethesda or Todd Howard or, you know, Xbox, this, that, and the other thing. But in the scope of Fallout in general, I think I don't want to say any specific percentage of the community, but, you know, Fallout 76 isn't viewed as like the best game. There are people that argue for, you know, Fallout 3, Fallout 1, Fallout 4, Fallout New Vegas, all that stuff. But we don't really see, and this is like, I think one of the super unique things about Fallout 76's community specifically, we don't see these larger scale fan-driven projects like, the audio dramas and the arts and other, sorts of groups like this. Obviously, we do see, bigger modding projects, but we don't see these larger tier creative projects from other segments of the Fallout community. So, what, in your opinion, in your own thoughts and your own machinations, why are we seeing this specifically from Fallout 76 that a decent amount of the fan base would probably regard as maybe not the worst Fallout game in history? Not gonna go any farther on that thought.
No. And I know, and this is actually a question I've asked myself in the past. That what is it about 76 that makes it unique, and does, and I think really what it comes down to is interactive community. Because when you play Fallout 4, when you play Fallout 3, when you play Fallout New Vegas, you are playing by yourself. Now you're interacting with the game, you're interacting with NPCs, but you're by yourself and you're making your own decisions. Also, with that, there is an end to those games. You can play Fallout New Vegas almost an endless amount of times with all of the mods that they have, plus the different endings that you can have, and all the different variety that they have. But at the end of the day, it's really just you. Now you can talk to your friends about it, but they're not in the game with you. Same thing for Fallout 4, same thing with Fallout 3. So what people fell in love with, I think, in the past has been this idea of the world of Fallout. They love the games, they love the Brotherhood, they hate the Enclave. Sometimes they love the Enclave, they hate the Brotherhood. Everybody hates the Minutemen.
Oh,
People have to decide between between Yes Man, the NCR, Legion, Mr. House. So, but these are all singular decisions. When 76 came out, all of a sudden Fallout fans found themselves not only talking to each other, but they were playing with each other and having this shared experience in a world that was as open as it can be. It's not as much as the 76 is an open world game, we're still constrained by, I think, some of the limitations of there. But what it really comes down to, I never interacted with people online before, like not in a game. That was not me. I was very much of a single player role playing game type of guy. I did some FPS, but I have awful hand eye coordination, so I would always get killed. But when I got into 76, it didn't matter as much. It was more about that shared experience that I was having with other people. And once I started talking to people online, I suddenly realized that there were other fans out there, and they were doing things in the game and they needed help. And, we were doing these public events where we're all together, and it developed this sense of community that really expanded beyond the game. And suddenly people were asking a lot of really good questions, wanting to learn more about the 76 universe, and also just using it like the Wasteland Theater Company. Who thought that anybody would be doing Shakespeare in a video game? Well, they're doing it, and they're doing it incredibly well. And so I think for all of its faults, what 76 has really done is brought the Fallout community together in a way that we've never had that opportunity to have these same kinds of shared experiences. And I think that has boosted the level of creativity. And I see a lot of people write fan fiction about, Fallout 3, Fallout 4, Fallout New Vegas. There's a lot of stuff out there. Most of it definitely not appropriate for kids. But beyond that, I think that it's just this idea of, we live in this world of 76. What is the story that we're telling? And I think that Ken had that experience. He wanted to tell his story. Brad wanted to tell his story. I really wanted to tell a story from the perspective of the bad guys, because I think that when you have incredibly interesting bad guys, you tell a really great story. And 76 gives us that opportunity because we decide who we want to be. We don't have to be a good guy. We could be a raider. We could be, and again, because of the limitations of the game, you can't necessarily do that in the game, but you create this persona around your character that drives this creativity. So really kind of the heart of your question is, why 76? Because it gives us a shared platform that extends beyond just ourselves. I see the way people were reacting to the game, and I was like, you know what? this is a story I want to tell. This is a backdrop that makes sense. And you don't get that with the other games. We get the Fallout universe, but we have a very scripted path that we're following through 1 and 2, 3, New Vegas. Again, we have options that we can choose, but at the end of the day, that game will end. When I get to 76, there's no end. I can make whatever adventure I want. If I want to go fight the Queen, I can go fight the Queen. I want to go New Girl, I can go New Girl. Do I just want to bum around the map now and fish? I can do that too. Do I want to hang out with my friends and exchange stories and trade resources and go on a raid? I can do that. Nobody tells me that I can't, and I'm not forced into anything. So I think that that's at its grounding. What 76 has really brought to the community is this idea that we all share the experience. And not only are we telling people about it, but now we can show people. And audio dramas is a very interesting way to do it, only because it's cheaper than having to do a video. Obviously, I would love to animate the MODUS Files, but it would cost an incredible amount of money. For my podcast, I sit in front of a computer and I'm able to speak into a microphone, and my words and the special effects that we use bring people into that story, and they can see themselves, and they can go into Fallout 76 and they can stand at in the shadow of Foundation, and they can see Spruce Lake, and they can see the new Enclave fighting against the imposter Sheep Squatch, and they can visualize that because they're there. They're standing there kind of looking at the scene, and I'm filling in all of the blanks. So I think that that's what the biggest difference has been. I think the one reason why also that maybe audio dramas don't get as much attention from people is that there's no publicly available metrics to know how well a podcast is doing. I can go to a YouTube channel and I can see, oh, this video has 1 million views, or it has 2 views, or it has whatever. I can and I can see subscribers. None of that information is available for a podcast. So I know how well we're doing, but the community doesn't necessarily do that. So we have to make up for that by also really being a part of the community. So it really kind of drives our engagement. We really love interacting with people, and I think that that's helping us kind of raise the profile. And actually, ironically enough, I was talking to one of my voice actors today. Funny enough, podcasts are very popular amongst long-haul truckers. We have a lot of fans that are driving trucks all across the country that just also happen to be Fallout fans. So they enjoy that as well. So I know, kind of a very long-winded answer, but I think that that's really my impression of why 76 has really been different, and why we've had these interesting creations that have come out of it that you wouldn't see out of the other games.
It's interesting that you bring up that that factoidal about the long haul truckers listening to long form podcasts, which absolutely makes sense. You're going on a 3-day long trip from one part of the country to another. You're going to get bored. You're going to want to have something to listen to. So long form podcast makes sense. It's interesting that it's specifically long haul truckers, because they are usually driving by themselves alone for long stretches of time, long periods of time, and it makes sense that they are able to relate or connect with Fallout, because I think one thing that a lot of people would say, and this is something that I see every once in a while when it comes to criticism of Fallout 76, is conceptually Fallout is like an isolating game. Loneliness, isolation, solitude, stuff like that, they're all sort of themes that get attributed to the main character. As somebody whose first game was Fallout 3, it was a bummer. It was a bummer. It was very bleak and sad, just walking around DC and the empty hills and wastelands and stuff all by yourself, because you're so alone. And I think one of the things that really set Fallout apart from a lot of other post-apocalyptic scenarios or games is I feel like a lot of them took a lot of inspiration from Mad Max, which is rightly so. Mad Max is an amazing story. But Mad Max is also a very action heavy game. Whereas Fallout, even going back to Fallout 1, it has action elements to it, but it's a lot denser in tone. It's bleaker. It's, less happy. It's probably like there's debate on to what degree it was actually intended to be, but Fallout leans a bit more towards horror than like a traditional like action or drama or any other sort of narrative. Like it's not actual horror, but the tone and the presence that it tries to build is similar to the tone and presence that a lot of good horror movies are built off of, isolation and a sort of disconnect from things around you. When it comes to conceptually, because we're talking about the Fallout 76 community and everything, to what degree do you think that sort of like lone wanderer, isolation or isolationist, loner, sort of theme is like to what degree is that a key part of the quintessential Fallout experience?
Well, I mean, I think that's, and actually, if you look at some of the interviews from the development team originally, I think their thought was when 76 came out that it would turn into that there would be more solitary players. Players would have to worry about getting shot, by the next person that showed up, because it was this idea that it's this gritty wasteland. And part of that, I mean, for almost my first year playing Fallout 76, I did play by myself. I didn't interact with other players. It was very much of that experience for me. Only because, again, I wasn't used to this idea of an online community. I think that it evolved over time to be more community driven, only because if you look at the average age of a Fallout player, we tend to skew older. So we're not necessarily, we're not off playing Fortnite. We're not off playing, some of these other first person shooters where
Speak for yourself.
Well, a lot. I mean, again, I don't speak for everybody, but I mean, heck, I actually liked Nuclear Winter. Okay, I actually
like 100%. Nuclear Winter was probably one of the better things that Fallout 76 has ever done. Like, yeah, hands down. Like, it wasn't amazing, right? Like, it wasn't the greatest thing that ever happened, because some people just think that like something has to be like, oh, it's got to be the greatest thing ever, or else it's like what was it? So somebody put it very eloquently. Anything that comes out today is either absolute trash or total peak. There's no in between, and it's like,
right,
yeah, but like Fallout Nuclear Winter was really great, and I think that, there's just a lot of negative connotation around like the concept of, battle royales and stuff like that. Maybe not like negative, but like, like, oh, we've been there, done that, like overplayed in a sense. So like it was really, really good, but I think it kind of fell into that era of like, oh, this isn't really where things are gaming wise, but like, yeah, it was really good. I really miss Nuclear Winter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was interesting, and I have to give the dev team credit that they tried a lot of interesting things. The survival servers were an interesting experiment, but I also think that there were a lot of technical limitations that they ran into at the same time. Like I'm sure you probably remember how laggy the game used to be,
yes.
Especially around things like the first series of raids that they did. The survival servers were, I mean, those were actually better. They weren't as laggy, but they were just not. The whole idea of survival just was not engineered very well because of the spawn camping. Like I could literally sit at White Spring Station and just shoot people as soon as they fast traveled in. So I mean that kind of destroyed that whole concept. But yeah. I would have liked to have seen more with Nuclear Winter, only because it was a very Fallout experience still, even in that world. It just, again, I maybe if it had been introduced today, it would have gotten a different reception. I think back in the day, I think a lot of people were very negative about a lot of things with 76, but I still have to give them credit. If you look at the live service games that all came out at about the same time as 76, it's the only one still going.
Yeah.
And I have to chalk that up to the fact that we have a very good group of people that just love Fallout, and it caters to a lot of different styles. Like there are people that still to this day don't interact with people in the game. They do their own lone wanderer thing. They explore Lucky Hole Mine. They do everything on their own. But there is, again, this idea of community, that we want everyone to have a good experience. We find very little griefing in the game. There are, you're going to have that, but in general, it's a very welcoming experience, and it's not hardcore Fallout. You're not going to get that. You're definitely not going to get that gritty Fallout 3 experience in Fallout 76. We will probably get that in Fallout 5 when that's, because I just heard that got greenlit. So in a few years, 4 or 5 years, we'll get that. But again, I think it's just an opportunity for us to experience Fallout. And again, kind of bring it all back to us being the character of our own story, that we can experience 76 the way that we want to, and we're not necessarily being told how to.
Right. It's more so the openness to be able to play in the way that you want, whether it's alone or with other people.
Right. Right.
But
I will say, I mean, if it wasn't for the people that I interacted with, again, I would not have had the impetus to write the story that I wrote. So
yeah, because
I have to credit those people for being a very inspirational.
Yeah, because you have that sort of outside third person like reverb, maybe not reverb, but more so like, something to bounce ideas off of, input rather.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, I mean, there are several characters that have become very important to our story, which were totally like OCs. They were just people's characters that got introduced into the story. I really liked them, and I started writing about them, and all of a sudden now they're major characters. So it's that kind of input that I think has helped this story become just so much more than what the original idea was. I mean, again, I wrote the final episode of the MODUS Files like 4 years ago, so I knew where we were going, but I filled up everything between now and that point with just everything that I've experienced. So it's been a really interesting journey overall, and 76 is a great kind of playground to continue to refresh those ideas and just kind of get in the head of the characters and understand like what they would be doing and what they would be experiencing, and and things that do change in the game, try to incorporate those as well. So
what do you think because there's you even mentioned it a little bit earlier, like Vault-Tec propaganda is actually just Enclave propaganda. I think one of the most iconic scenes in the entire series is the introduction to Vault 2 or to Fallout 2, where I forget which vault specifically, but the Enclave are dropping down in front of a vault. They knock on the door, the vault opens, and like, hi, and then the Enclave just guns them all down, right? Absolutely brutal. Crazy way to open a video game. But again, I can't recall exactly if it's ever been like 100% proven. Like, the speculation and the strong theory is out there. Besides, Tim Kaine basically saying like, oh yeah, that was the idea that we were going to, that was the idea that we were going for when we were doing Fallout 2. We just didn't, get the information actually in there that, the vaults were actually Enclave experiments to see, to test different scenarios to basically ready humans for space travel and stuff like that, which, in like by, you know, direct, you know, down the line relation means that Vault Tech was working for the Enclave, but that's not really something that Bethesda has felt the need to outright confirm, but more so very strongly hint, especially in the TV show. However, that's more so specifically like Vault Tech as a company and their relationship with the Enclave. When it comes to the Enclave's relationship with the Vault Dwellers, how do you describe that relationship? Because I feel like it's definitely changed a lot and sort of like is continuing to change. But when you think of it, especially since you're writing a story set during the time period of Fallout 76, and from the perspective of effectively the Enclave, how are you viewing your relationship between those two factions?
Well, so it's actually it's very interesting to think about, because you also have to kind of remove. So if you're looking at it, this is really the first experience after the war. So this is only 25 years after the bombs drop. So the idea of what the Enclave would become, like what we see in Fallout 2, what we see in Fallout 3, is, you know, is at least 100 years in the future, you know, 80 to 100 years in the future. And in the case of Fallout 3, it's a lot more than that. But you are looking at the idea of the Enclave, which is very much the idea of what the pre-war American government was, which is, you know, we're here, you know, we're going to make sure we are fighting for the American way of life. That's really what they're doing. Now, it's a really screwed up version of the American way of life, but that's what they're really for. So if you're a vault dweller and you are, you know, in some cases you were born before the war, so you have some memory of what it was like back then, but in many cases my idea is that a lot of these people were born in the vault. Their picture of what the outside world was is going to be very skewed. It's very much going to be this idea of this idealistic America. So when they go out, they're really going to be more. I mean, you could almost say that any typical person walking out of Vault 76 would probably join the Enclave in a second, because that's the representation of the future that they've been, you know, really almost bred into. So in my mind, you know, kind of creating this idea of my characters, they're doing what they think is right. Now, that thinking that it's right and it being right are two completely different things. You know, like one of the quotes that I use is atrocity is just another word for getting things done. You know, so it's willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish what your mission is. And in this case, they want to rebuild America in the image of the old. So again, this idea of the Enclave is actually not a dirty word. You know, our Vault Dwellers should look at the Brotherhood of Steel and be like, those guys are all traitors. They were members of the U.S. military that mutinied. You know, the Responders, well, they're naive and they don't understand the way things are. So when you kind of think of this, like the default really in 76 should be, we love the White Spring, we love MODUS, we love the Enclave, because that's what you have been told for 25 years. And, you know, and then you think about this idea of Vault Tech, you know, you almost can't even separate the two, you know, because Enclave is the government. Vault Tech is a company that works for the government. Vault Tech is helping prepare for the future. That's the story. So put yourself in the shoes of being like, you know, let's just say you walk out of the vault an 18-year-old kid, you are going to be whistling Yankee Doodle Dandy and you know and being able to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. And then you pick up a plasma rifle and you're blowing away creatures that are you consider abominations. That's just the way that it would be. So at least in my opinion, I think that that's kind of how I would think the characters would look at it. Because again, you don't forget all of the other lore of Fallout. None of that has happened yet. You have the Great War. You have 25 years in the vault. you're suddenly sitting in Appalachia. Yeah, you're gonna default to Vault-Tec is fantastic, and oh, these guys, the Enclave, wow, they sound really cool. Oh, and they have really big guns. Yeah, those are the guys that we want to be a part of. Hope that made sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I feel as if because especially this also kind of leads back to my question about how the story has sort of like changed and evolved as Fallout 76 has changed and evolved. But now, especially at this point, and you know, it's been the case for a year at this point, because we now also have Fallout Prime, the TV show, which admittedly they haven't done a whole lot of stuff with the Enclave yet, but like it's like something's they're cooking something up. The Enclave's gonna pop up in a big way. Whether that be pre-war or post-war, you know, who can say? But when it comes to as with the previous question that I asked earlier, when it comes to newer media that comes out, like the like Amazon Prime, and new stuff about the Enclave and stuff, how does that also further shape what the Enclave was with relation to stuff that happened before the Great War, and how the Enclave or how the story in MODUS Files moves and changes to sort of become the thing that they inevitably become later on in the Fallout timeline.
Well, so interestingly enough, I think that if my story had ended a different way, I think you would see a pretty radical, or actually, I think a conflict between the Enclave that was developing in Appalachia versus, say, the Enclave that was developing on the West Coast and on the Poseidon oil rig. Because in this case, you don't have all of the baggage. You have a bunch of ideas about what the Enclave represents and what it should be. And so as our characters are working through and building this organization, yes, they are ruthless. Yes, they do horrible things. But they also don't necessarily have this idea that they need to eliminate like anything that's a mutant. Like you don't have a lot of the blatant racism. You don't have a lot of the bigotry that you see from the traditional Enclave. But that's also baggage that Enclave kind of brought with them before the war. Those were ideas and attitudes that I think were already developing within this greater organization. When you look at the new Enclave in Appalachia, you know, they really were building, you know, Colonel Valeria's ideas were more around, I would say, this idealized view. It's almost like if you took somebody like a fresh kid that doesn't know anything and you hand them a book by Karl Marx and you say, I want you to start a commune, and I want you to use this book as a guide. Well, they don't know the history of Karl Marx. They don't know the history of communism. They know nothing of that. So what they create is going to be something, and I don't want to say that it's more pure, but it's just going to be different, and it's not going to have this preconceived notion of just badness that you get from like the Enclave, because they are bad guys. Over here, instead, you have these characters that are falling into the niche of, we are the Enclave. These are we want to rebuild the country. We want a strong government. We believe in control, and we are going to do very horrible things. But it allows them to have a wider, I guess, cast a wider net. And they can actually not consider all ghouls to be abominations and kill them on sight. It's more of this person who is, through the eyes of Valeria, through our story, you see her kind of go from this pre-programmed soldier, who's just following orders, to growing and kind of understanding more about the wasteland and seeing other ways to accomplish her mission that are still like very morally gray. I mean, she literally infects a person with the Scorch Plague so she can get Foundation on her side. I mean, she sits there, she drinks a beer, She eats a fancy lead snack cake, and she watches this woman turn into a monster. Like, that's horrible. But she's doing it for what she considers to be the right reason. So in all of that, I think that you would see this development of an enclave that is, I think, more encompassing, more friendly to people overall, but in the background would be more than happy to be like, yeah, that person's a little political, that they're being a little too political for us. She would literally hand that person to Lilith and let Lilith eat her or them or whoever they are. So in a way, this enclave still has all of that, that desire for control, but it doesn't have all of the baggage that you would see from the West Coast. Because I think what you see from in the games, and I'm sure what we'll see in the TV show, is that they are very it's human supremacy. That's like what they're all about. And then they go from human supremacy to U.S. supremacy, and that's what they do. And I used the opportunity within Appalachia, within Fallout 76, to be like, okay, well, what if the Enclave wasn't racist? What if they weren't as bad as they were? What would that look like? And so I think that that's maybe how I've looked at it and some of the differences that I've made in the story. But again, they're still that I would still say, even in my story, even though they do good things, they're really the bad guys. Like all of the other factions, really, at the end of the day, are scared of them. They're happy to cooperate in some cases, but they're not the good guys.
I've had a couple people in like my Discord server, my comments and stuff like that, often recommend like Enclave centric mods, which the names always escape me because I have the memory of a dead goldfish.
Oh, America Rising.
That's what it is. Yeah. There's another one too that I can't remember the name of it, which is, it's good. I've played, but there's like two that I can't recall that, but I mean, there's America Rising, and there's like one or two other ones that I play that I can't remember the name of, but they're good. They're very well made, very well written. But they also sort of run the same sort of story beats. Like, what would it be like if the Enclave, wasn't like super racist all the time or super humanist all the time? Maybe xenophobic. Well, maybe xenophobic is the right word, but
yeah, I think xenophobic works. Yeah, but I think that there's also, there's this idea of, because the way I look at it too is that you do have to accept that, like, because I've played a number of those mods, and I what I find is that there's way too much plot armor. They do sometimes make decisions that I find to be very suspect, only because it's like, well, no, that actually doesn't make any sense. I actually believe that you're better off, if you're going to make bad guys, they've got to be human. They have to make mistakes. They have to. They're not necessarily going to win. That's almost like the role of a bad guy, is that they're ultimately going to lose. You need to make the idea that they're going to lose interesting, and not just be like I hate the mustache twirling villains, but I also hate like the white hat like heroes that just ride in and save everybody. It's like you really have to ride that gray area, especially in Fallout. And so yeah, I think that it's you can lose some of that stuff, but again, at the end of the day, it's like I just love writing villains. I love writing people that you can watch them grow, but at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, they're still not good people.
Yeah, and I think story-wise, that's just important to have one time. I was listening to NPR one time, like several months ago, probably like last year at some point. Probably like exactly last year at this point. But I'm listening to NPR, and I can't remember the name of the book, but they were talking about this book. I think they had the author on or something. And the book was basically about, I want to say it was set during the Watt riots. But it was about this lady whose daughter goes missing. And so she goes on this whole big, journey to find her. Like she's somewhere in the city and she just like goes out to try to find her and stuff. The I guess maybe the draw of the book is that the character is less than liberal in her or less than conservative in her, well, maybe more. She's not shy about using language that we in polite company would deem as unacceptable when talking about various groups of individuals. She's quite racist, in fact. But the interesting thing is, I think over the course of the book, she does, have to, reach out to members of like the Black community and stuff for help and assistance in finding her family. But then, like, maybe not the twist, but at the end of the book, the writer subverted, I think, the normative exception for how a character would grow and develop in those sorts of in those sorts of stories, in making it so that she doesn't get a redemption arc. She doesn't really change. She still holds a lot of the same viewpoints. And the overall message is that, or maybe not the message in like the message of the book, but from a narrative standpoint, there are like certain characters where, because there's so many stories that are from the perspective of the villain, and a lot of them have, some sort of redeeming quality or like redemption arc. I think for a while, redemption arcs were super popular with villainous characters. But there are some stories that have to be told where the character is just a bad person. Yeah, maybe they have like, redeeming qualities and stuff, but they're still doing morally questionable or morally objectionable things. And at times there's not really a space or a need for a redemption story for those characters, because they don't either need or deserve a redemption story. And so I see a lot of times people, recommending these mods and stuff, and I play them and they're great and they're awesome. But when I think of the Enclave conceptually, I see that same thing. Like, they're definitely going out and they're trying to restore the ideal and the vision of America that they think is, the best one. And there's probably a lot of them that go out there and do it for, what they perceive as virtuous and righteous reasons, but they do a lot of not virtuous and not very righteous things in the process. So I can't help but look at the Enclave as a group that perhaps maybe is undeserving of redemption, but perhaps doesn't require redemption. And a lot of these mods sort of like, it feels like they try to do that in sort of a very rewriting history kind of way, or perhaps in some cases reimagining the history of the Enclave, trying to frame it in more of a patriotic point of view, where, there's a little bit of ends justify the means, but they try to like work around it to where you can still do good things in the Enclave. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad way to write the story, but I feel like a lot of people's conception when they think of the Enclave is just bad guy. And whether or not it's, a cliche of writing, they remain the constant bad guy. And as far as that extends to the community, we've also seen, various community members utilizing Enclave imagery and iconography and talking points in a again less than appropriate in polite society, polite conversation sort of way. I don't I don't remember that. Well, you might actually remember this. There was like a couple years ago, there was some like just random group that popped up in Fallout 76 that was basically like, we're like, I can't, I'm pretty sure they were going around saying they were the Enclave or something, but they're like basically like,
it was General Fox and the Enclave Armed Forces.
yes, that was it. And they were basically like, oh, like no trap camps. You can't like do this. You can't do that. Like you have to play nice. You have to play the way that we tell you to play, or like, you know, we're going to nuke your base or something like that. I don't think it was that specifically, but it was something like that. And so like, there's a lot of, from both the writing perspective, negative connotation about the Enclave because they're the bad guys, blah, blah, blah. Understandable. But then on the other side, there's also a lot of negative connotation about the Enclave when it comes to how some, you know, weird sunlight deprived people, speaking as a sunlight deprived person myself, have utilized the concept and the energy of the Enclave in, you know, less than community friendly ways. So when you're writing and thinking about your version of the Enclave, to what degree do these two factors, both the concept of the Enclave being a, for lack of a better term or a lack of more detailed term, an irredeemable faction, and the relationship, or maybe more so, the community mindset around other people in the community that go around in like Enclave cosplay and be mean to other people. How do you sort of take these things in? To what volume do these elements play in your writing process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's to me, it's at the end of the day, it's a game. It's a game. And people will take it too seriously. I mean, just like people who, you know, I remember that there's always people that want to roleplay raiders. They try to destroy people's camps. They build trap camps. You know, they're playing in that persona, and sometimes that can get out of hand as well. I fully, you know, for a very long time, I would almost have nothing to do with more regular Enclave groups within the game, within the community, only because I think that they do take it too far. They look at it as, I can't say it's a way of life, but I think it's a perspective that can be very unhealthy, as much as the raider persona can be unhealthy. And you know, I think that you have to be very careful about how you treat it. I again look at it as a backdrop, and I wanted to, you know, because if you think about it, everything in Fallout seems to be at some point or another revolves around the Brotherhood of Steel. Everybody considers the Brotherhood of Steel to be good guys. You know, you get a lot of people that want to be members of the Brotherhood, etc. So you have a lot of role play groups for the Brotherhood. To me, they're also the bad guys. Like I don't really see, I almost see no good people within Fallout at the end of the day from a faction perspective. So I just look at it as fertile writing, for the opportunity to write really good stories kind of based around all of this moral ambiguity. I very much reject the idea that anyone should be telling anybody else in the game what to do. I think if you are embracing the ideals of the Enclave, that's also not appropriate. As much as I would say to anybody, you know, if you're going to have a good time, have a good time, but respect players' boundaries. Like this is, I purposely chose the Enclave because I wanted to write a story from the perspective of somebody that was, quote unquote, the bad guy. That's what I did. I don't embrace any of the, personally, they're a horrible faction. I believe you're also right. I believe that they are irredeemable, but I'll also turn around and say the Brotherhood of Steel, as it exists after Fallout 4, is also an irredeemable faction. We saw that in the TV show. Like, I don't believe the Brotherhood is the future either. So I think that we really should look at this again as like, hey, the whole idea is that all these people are bad. Or all these factions are bad. Look at the individuals within them and what they're trying to do, and like treat them as individuals. In the game, please just try to keep that stuff out of it. Like, don't, like that again. We have enough problems in the outside world. We don't need them within Fallout. Fallout is a special place for all of us. Let's keep it that way.
To again, sort of, because like to more so hyper focus on the secondary point there, the
irredeemable faction sort of concept. To expand on that a little bit, there's I'm a big film buff. The place that I'm currently living, technically both of the housemates that used to live here with me before my current ones, were also big film buffs. All three of us at one point had gone to school specifically to study film and stuff like that. So we all love movies. It's great. Movies are awesome. One of the genres of movies that me and one of the other housemates specifically like really fell in love with, and have just like been in love with just like perpetually, is horror movies. And with horror movies, you're always looking for like the next like really good one, because some things it's just that's not as great. It doesn't feel like just it's not as scary. It's like it's not there. In our ventures for like quality horror movies, I came across this one film, an Argentinian film called When Evil Lurks. The basic concept is, let's see, it's a dad trying to protect his family in a world where, if I'm remembering correctly, basically like people die. If they die in a specific way, like in a violent way, they're resurrected by like a demon, and the like demons, multiple, but like multiple people get resurrected, but like they come back and then like, oh, bad scary stuff, and there's like a little bit of like witchcraftery stuff. But the point is, at the end of the movie, I won't spoil the end of the movie, but basically, it's like, with a lot of horror movies, a lot of endings are sort of like bad endings, because then all of a sudden, like, oh, the monster came back, and like like very very Friday the 13th style ending, where Jason comes up from the from the lake and grabs the lady in the boat and pulls her back down, and like, oh, bad ending, the main character died. But in this case, and it's not just When Evil Lurks, it's multiple different movies do this, but it's a bad ending, but the main character hasn't died. They just now live in like, the you lose the game sort of state. It's a bad ending, and the main character or the protagonist just like exists in it. When dealing with or when writing for a bad character, an evil faction, evil organization, stuff like that, there as we sort of talked about, there is always that perspective of like, oh, are they on like a redemption arc? Are they not on a redemption arc? Are we just watching bad people do morally questionable things under the justification that what they think they're doing is good or is going to lead to the positive outcome? With the story that you're writing, obviously, like not giving away spoilers and stuff like that, is there going to be a good ending? Is it, are you going to do it Hamlet style where everybody just dies? Or is the story more so going to be like, we've entered into the bad timeline, and this is just where we have ended up? Like, this is where you close the book, and that's how the story ends. Is there a redemption arc, or is it just the march into oblivion?
Well, I think that so for me, it's a blend. So if we look at, because it's not just a story about one character, there's actually multiple characters, and they all, their stories, as much as this story is going to end, it's going to branch off into multiple other stories as well. And ultimately, I want to connect this story to the larger Fallout universe. So there may be in the future connections to Fallout 1, Fallout 2, Fallout 3, Fallout 4. I mean, there could be connections to kind of everything. So it's not so much that there's a good ending as much as there was a conclusion. and characters have to accept their fates. There are going to be characters that are going to die. There are characters that are going to live. There are characters that will have to live with horrible decisions that they've had to make. There are characters that don't necessarily get a conclusion right now. They reach a point where they are unsure of what happens next. So there is a resolution of Appalachia, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's some characters redeem themselves, other characters go in the opposite direction. So it's really this idea of everyone being on their own path. Those paths have crossed. Now they start to split up again. And yes, there are people that will be forced to live. In fact, there's a quote I use, do not mourn the dead. Do not mourn the dead. Mourn for those that have to live what they've done with what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this idea that sometimes you have to make what you would consider the right decision, and it goes horribly wrong, and you have to live with that. So kind of going back to what you said, it's like this is not a happily ever after. But is in Fallout, is there ever really a happily ever after? The one refrain that we keep hearing in Fallout is that war never changes. Well, why does war never change? It doesn't change because humanity as a whole doesn't change. We are racing headlong into our own destruction in Fallout. That's really what this has been. And my story parallels a lot of that, which is this continuation of trying to solve the problems of Fallout using the same decision cycle and kind of the same ideas that led them there in the first place. So, yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I think what you'll see as you go through the story and as you see these characters develop that yes, they will live with the repercussions of their actions, and in some cases that means it's a happier ending for them, but in other cases it's really someone having to grapple with kind of realizing at the end of the day that they did really horrible things, and how do you make up for that? Is there enough time in one lifetime to make up for doing something that you thought was right at the time, but suddenly you realize, oh wow, it really wasn't. And then also sometimes you discover that you could not have made a different decision. So like think about like a decision that you made like 3 or 4 years ago coming back to haunt you, to realize that, wow, I really shouldn't have done that, because now suddenly the choice you thought you had, you don't have anymore. So again, not to give away any spoilers, and I don't mean to kind of, I don't want to like kind of dance around the issue here, but I think as you see the characters go through, some characters that started out very idealistic really do come crashing back to earth, and within this idea of, wow, I made a mistake and I can't do anything about it.
Yeah. Because I think that's one of the things that really makes the MODUS Files specifically a really interesting story, just because of that fact that you're dealing with characters that are they're obviously they're aligning themselves with a faction that we understand to be, I'm going to say subjectively bad for the sake of being too controversial. But
Right.
It's a story about people who join a faction that they believe is doing the best for everyone, or the best they can anyway. And along the way, as you've talked about, they do things that, again, we as the viewer would consider to be morally reprehensible, unethical, or just plain inhuman in various different colloquial terms. But overall, as from the character's perspective, like, yes, they may sometimes recognize it as being something bad, but it's a means to a positive end. And just like with those bad decisions that we make, they can come back around and bite you on the ass. So it's interesting having a story from that perspective that really focuses on that perspective, because so many stories that we see are, as we talked about before, so many stories from the perspective of the bad guy or the villain or the antagonist. See them going in oh, they eventually become good, or they have those redeeming qualities, and you sort of forget the negative things. And being able to hold them as a storyteller, being able to hold them to the choices they make, to the decisions they make, until the inevitable ending, whatever that ending may be, I think it's a really interesting and really impressive decision when it comes to storytelling, especially when done right, which I think the Modus Files is doing right, because it's all about holding the character responsible for their own actions. Yeah, and I like that. It's good. It's a perspective, especially in Fallout, because it's not like Assassin's Creed, right? Where there's like a new game for a while, there's a new game every single year. And there's been a couple of games where people have been able to experience things from the side of the antagonist, or play as the antagonist, or get a perspective from that while still holding them in the position of the antagonist, and then being able to switch to something that's, now you're playing as the good guy again. Fallout doesn't as often get those opportunities to explore those sorts of stories. You have instances in the games where you can be a bad guy, but very rarely does the story hold you to those decisions that you make, and make you stick with the consequences of the decisions that result in a negative way on you. So I like the I like the direction, or the
I think too, I think that it's interesting because if let's just say you're a good guy and you suddenly find yourself up against a really bad guy, sometimes it pays to have another bad guy on your side, because sometimes you need a bad guy to be able to make the decisions that or to do the things that have to be done to win. Because if you find yourself in a no-win situation, you want to be fighting alongside somebody that is going to fight a little dirty. And I think that's one of the interesting things that we've been able to bring in here, especially with my Enclave having to work together with the Brotherhood of Steel, working together with with Foundation, that they don't necessarily like these people, but they also are we would rather these people be on our side because there's a bigger bad out there. And I think that that's something I think that in Fallout we've lacked, is this. We've had threats. I think we've had few really existential threats, and I think that through the plot of the Modus Files, I've actually come up with completely on my own an existential threat that makes even the bad guys look good, which is somewhat difficult to do, and actually kind of throw all of these different factions together at the end of the day, and kind of force them to prevent history from repeating itself. So it was a facet of the story that people are having to make these really bad decisions, but they're doing it because it's the only choice they have left because of what they're facing. It's not it's not this idea of this free-flowing story. It's there is this threat that kind of emerged in our third season that is really, really scary. And it's scary because of almost the banality of it. And I don't know how far you've gotten into it, if you've gotten to this faction that I created called the Pact.
Mm-hmm.
But that's people think the Enclave is bad. Oh, no. The Enclave are like kids compared to what these people are. And that's something that I think that everybody could kind of get pointed towards. But at the same time, it also, throughout the story, there's all these Easter eggs and things happen, and people get killed, and there are incidents that happen, and all of the time where all of these people could have been working together, they've been split apart. But that was all part of the plan. It was we're going to keep all these people separated, and we're going to take over, and we're going to do this other thing. So it's been part of this. I mean, there's so many different layers to this story, and and again, just being able to tell it from that very morally ambiguous thing, it's like you're going to make different decisions. Like a good guy, like a quote unquote good guy, wouldn't do what my characters do. But that's what makes it interesting, because sometimes you don't know what they're going to do. You don't know how they're going to get out of this. You don't know what's going to happen next. And I think that's what makes a more compelling story.
The last guest we had on the show, Braden Lee, Thane, the lead developer of Fallout New California, even because what was it? New California came out in 2016, I think. One of the funny things that when I was playing it, one of the things that I noticed that I thought was probably unintentional, but actually very funny that it did happen. I can't remember his name, but it was Coach Bragg. That's what it was. There's a character in the mod called Coach Bragg, and he's, spoiler alert, he's Enclave. But in over the course of the mod, and a lot of it more so specifically at the beginning of the mod, he has a very sort of like, we're going to restore America to its former glory, like patriotism, all the, like, down with commies, all that, typical Enclave rhetoric. But then he's also like wearing a red hat and talking about, maybe not in exact words, but like, making America great again and stuff. And Thane said that when he had like written, like it was like a while before like 2015 and 2016, that he had completed like pretty much all of the stuff related to like Coach Bragg and the introductory location of New California, which was inside a vault, and we talked about that, and if I'm remembering correctly, he didn't say that there was any direct, like inspiration he took or anything like that, but like, a lot of times life does in fact imitate art, and art does in fact imitate life, whether it be coincidental or not. I feel like just perpetually with a faction like the Enclave, there's always things that happen in the game, things that happen in real life, things that happen in the changing of the zeitgeist that constantly sort of make all these little micro changes to how we think about, various factions or groups in video games, in stories, in film, like everything. I think perhaps one of the more notable, or perhaps more so infamous, examples is probably like Zack Snyder and the Snyderverse of DC films. A lot of the characters were written in a much more, like dark, troubled way. We think like broody Superman and stuff like that. And now with like James Gunn's Superman, there's a lot more of a hopeful attitude, like a golden boy kind of thing, which like a lot of the original comics were like, that was the focus on of how they designed their character. And like, this isn't a new thing. This is like, we go through like waves of this, but when it comes to the Enclave specifically, and the reality of the ever-changing real life political landscape, the changing of the video game industry, the kinds of stories that are told, the changing of the overall cultural zeitgeist, how have these elements sort of changed or influenced the way that you design your stories for this faction specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it's, we are, we're all steeped in culture, and I think it's impossible to get away from being. It's impossible to not be influenced by in some form or fashion. And what I've really tried to do is try to stay true to the vision that I created originally. And there's been because of my particular writing style, which is literally just sitting down. I don't have notes. I don't do an outline. I literally do episode stream of consciousness. So it's very much of everything that I've got in my head, and I just pour that out. Um, the world around us is very chaotic, and I think that it's 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 important to remember that what we're doing is just really is telling a story, and we want to be true to the characters that we write. Um, I try to avoid typical tropes. In fact, one of the things I was taught this a while back, which is I try to write my characters. They're not necessarily gender specific. So you could take pretty much any of my characters and you could switch them out. You could make Valeria a man if you wanted to, or you could take um, Stein and make Stein a woman, and it wouldn't necessarily change who they are, what that character is. And it's not to say that I'm completely agnostic with that. I mean, nobody can be agnostic about it. But I think that looking at it from the perspective of the Enclave, I really wanted to stay true to the idea of this is a faction that is going to do bad things, and I'm not trying to portray them as heroes, nor am I trying to portray them as mustache twirling villains. So, regardless of kind of what's going on out here, it's more about really staying true to this original vision of wanting not only to be true to my vision, but also just, you know, I did not want people to look at this Enclave and be like, well, this is all BS. This has nothing to do with what's going on over here. I wanted it all to be cohesive within the universe. And I think that even within the faction like an Enclave, you're going to have people that are further to the extremes, and you're going to have people who are kind of more in the middle, though even those people in the middle are still going to be kind of steeped in that idea that this is going to be we're going to do what we need to do. We're going to steamroll the people that are in front of us that are getting in our way, but we're doing it because this is what our mission is. And again, it's still trying to keep this idea of escapism too. It's like it's not about trying to change things so much as it's trying to engage people and make them think too, because a lot of times you'd have to look at some of these actions and actually ask yourself, if I was in that position, would I make the same decision? What decision would I make? And if I made a different decision, why? Is it just because that's icky, or do you actually have like an actual reason for it, and does it get you the same result? So it's a little bit harder to ask only or to answer necessarily, because I don't want to inject too much of the real world into what I do. I also don't want to necessarily be beholden to canon in a way that it prevents me from doing things. I'm not gonna I don't want to break Fallout. I want to tell a story that could exist within the Fallout universe, and people could look at this and say, yes, I understand this. This makes sense within the context of the greater world. That's very important to me, because I want Fallout fans to be able to embrace this and make this part of kind of their experience of Fallout, so that when they think about, when we think about the world of Fallout, we think of the games. I want us to start thinking about fan-made content in the same way, that we can all exist within the same world, and that these are really compelling stories, and they like the characters, and they even say things like, wow, wouldn't it be great if characters were in the game? I would love to have these as NPCs, because I think they would add something to the world. That's, kind of my thoughts on the subject, at least.
Right. Yeah. It's a story not influenced by modern politics, but at the same time can't be like completely ignorant to the, I guess more so the general approach, meaning, attempts behind them, because like you said, every villain is like the hero of their own story, and I think a lot of times in the modern reality, we forget that, obviously there are people that do bad things for selfish reasons and stuff like that. But a lot of the times people are doing things because they think that it's for, the greater good.
The greater good. Yeah.
Yeah. So the greater good. Such a fucking good movie.
Oh, I love it. Love that movie. That movie is awesome.
Hot Fuzz. Amazing. But yeah, so not being completely ignorant of, the reality of the modern times, but also, crafting a story that's not relying on, the temperature of the moment, more so acknowledging it, but not being dictated by it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe another way to look at it is that, and it's funny because you mentioned the issue with Once Upon a Wasteland, where somebody was like lesbians in Fallout. Whoa,
right? Yeah.
The choices that I make from my characters, I first of all, I don't pander. I'm not pandering to anybody. The choices that I make for my characters are the ones that I make based on what I feel is right for the story. It's right for those characters. And actually, maybe I've made it when somebody does go in the comments and they're like, well, I don't understand why this character is doing this, or this, I don't like this character doing this. And I think that that's certainly a valid opinion. Everybody's opinion, that everybody can have their opinion. I look at it as, I don't pander. I don't make decisions based on what I think people will find. Maybe I'll put it another way. My characters are who they are, not because I want them to be popular or not because I want people to look at them in a good light. The characters exist within a world, and I want them to react to that world in a way that we can understand. And the choices they make and who they are is not going to be agreed to everyone. That's kind of the whole point. You don't go into a group of 100 people and like everybody. And in this case, when I'm writing these characters, when you have Valeria and Lily Stein and Private Lawson and Trader Red, all of these people are fully fleshed individuals. And they're not there to fill a particular stereotype. They're there because the story dictates that they're there and that the actions that they do impact the story. So that's actually one very kind of hard and fast rule that I have, is that these are done for a good reason in the story. They're not there to fill a stereotype. I completely try to stay away from that as much as possible. And when I do kind of find myself writing into a stereotype, I consciously make changes in a way that makes more sense. And it's just more thought invoking, because I find writing in a lot of movies to be very cheap, very trope driven, very not engaging, because it's like when I can watch a movie and 10 minutes into it, I can guess the ending. I can guess what's going to happen next because the characters are written in a very particular way. I hate that. I want my characters to be real people, and real people are going to make all different kinds of decisions and they're going to act different ways. And I love that. I love the freedom of that. I don't have to be another way. And I think that's another reason why telling my own story is so important to me, because it's what's important to me. It's not, again, I'm not doing this because I want to be the most popular person on the planet. I don't need 8 bazillion downloads of my podcast. I want people to go through the story of the Modus Files. I want them to understand and engage with the characters and have a compelling story to adopt, and want to learn more about Fallout in general and want to be part of all of this. That ultimately is what drives me. And it helps me escape a lot of the other stuff that goes on, like up in the world. And again, I'll go back to saying, I just love this canvas that we have, and I will continue to paint what I want to paint for as long as I'm allowed to.
There was I was hanging out with my housemate, the ex-housemate, a couple months ago, and we're just like hanging out, watching YouTube, watching like trailers. He pulls up like a, one of those like compilation trailers, like, oh, here's a bunch of like, trailers for stuff that's coming out, and we're getting to this one. I can't remember who's that. Jeez, I can't even remember. I can't remember the name as most of what he's in, but it's like, one of those like action movie kind of things, and he's like they're doing the whole build up before the name reveal and stuff, and he's all like walking around, and it seems like he's like carrying construction tools and stuff like that. And I have a weird relationship with a lot of action films because a lot of them seem very much like the same thing, basically, like a lot of the same story beats, a lot of the same character intentions, motivations, stuff like that. And a lot of it feels very formulaic to me. That's when something like, like John Wick or something comes along, and it's very different, or at least, it might have some similar tropes and elements, but the way that it handles them and the way that it deals with them is unique. Then it's it's different, and it's interesting for me. But with this trailer specifically, the dude's like, he's walking around, he's talking. I'm seeing a lot of, he's at construction sites, and it seems like he has like, construction equipment, and I'm just, bullshitting with my housemate, and they're like, oh, look at this guy, he's the bricklayer. And then God damn it, if 5 seconds later didn't go past and the action guy in the movie said, I'm the bricklayer, and I just kind of like hung my head in abject disappointment while my housemate over there just like damn near split his sides open for real, just laughing his ass off at just how karmically perfect how cosmically perfect that was. I will never forget that moment as long as I live, because it's both, it's just that thing. It's as you were saying, there are so many stories where you can so clearly, like from the get-go, tell exactly what the rest of the story is going to be like, because a lot of it is so formulaic and so, like paint by numbers, that there is almost no difference from, one iteration to the other. And I feel like with some movies, like, long running series where it's like, oh, like movie number 3, 4, 5, 6, stuff like that. I feel like that's sort of a little different because it's sort of confined to one series, one franchise. And so kind of like the Fast and the Furious movies, right? Like the quality of the movies did get better. It did sort of, improve. But in the broad scope, a lot of it's still very much the same. But from the Fast and the Furious franchise, you kind of expect that, right? You expect them to try to, like, one up the ante every single time. When it sort of spreads out and becomes like that's what every franchise is doing, it gets boring. It gets dull because the writing isn't diverse enough to where it's like, well, I just saw this happen in this other thing. I don't need to see this because it's going to be the exact same experience. So when you're writing something for the podcast and stuff, or just anything, like any creative venture, if you're able to sort of be able to recognize and then sidestep a lot of those pitfalls that lead to that, that sort of exasperated, I've seen this before, I've read this before, I know what this is. Nothing new. There's nothing new here for me to experience. If you're able to recognize how people or how stories fall into that that situation, then you're able to avoid them, you're able to write around them, and you're able to write a much more interesting and compelling story, which is, from what you're saying, something that you're doing with the MODUS Files. And I feel as if, because again, the MODUS Files specifically is very unique because it's an audio drama, not from a perspective of a sort of heroine character, but somebody who is what we would probably more so perceive as an antagonist. They are the protagonist of our story, but we would assign them more in sort of like maybe not an outright villain role, but definitely a morally questionable role when it comes to their position in the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I've done too, and this isn't really even a spoiler, but the overseer plays actually a pretty pivotal role in the story as it progresses. And in any other piece of work, I think she would be a hero. And instead, she has very much become kind of one of the villains. She is actually somebody who, so the roles have kind of been reversed. And I think in a way, when you can start making people root for the bad guys, that's when I think you've actually kind of grabbed your audience, because now all of a sudden, wow, the perspective has changed. And that's I think it's a good sign of getting people to engage with the story, because now they're making value judgments that kind of run counterintuitive. And I think that's something that I think that we've strived to do. And also just within the context of Fallout 76, we've also really tried to flesh out a lot of kind of the ambiguous stories that Bethesda has tried to tell, like, taking characters like Sophia Daguerre, the astronaut, and really kind of flesh them out more as a true character. And I think that that's another reason why I think a lot of people are gravitated to the story, is that they can experience Fallout 76, but in a way that is actually much deeper, much more compelling, and more interesting than just what you get from a simple NPC interaction in the game itself. Which is, I think, another one of our strengths, and it's something I continue to try to play to, which is make the story that's already there so much more interesting.
When it comes to, I guess more so because every maybe not every story, but a lot of stories have themes that they explore, looking for certain narrative messaging, meta narrative, focal points, concepts that they want to talk about. I listened to a video essay last night that was talking about this game called Anatomy, and it explored this really interesting thought experiment as like it was imagining, or perhaps maybe not imagining, but relating the different rooms of a house to different parts of the human body. So, the kitchen, I think, was analogous to like the stomach. The bedroom was analogous to the human mind. The staircase was analogous to the spinal column. And effectively the game was like the thought experiment. The point of the thought experiment was basically like, like what happens when like a home starts to decay. What does that say about the, like, how does that relate to the person? Homes are a lot of times considered expressions of the person that lives there. If the house is messy and untidy, you can expect the person that lives there to be. If the house is very well organized and meticulously clean, you can expect the other person to be. And then it's like, what happened? Like, what does it say about the person when the house is like breaking down? And it's like it was a horror game, so it was doing this through blood and organs and other sinewy examples. But effectively, the message was basically like, as sort of meme-ish as it sounds, it was go outside, make friends, talk to people, don't isolate yourself, like seek out community and stuff like that. With the MODUS Files, is that something that you are doing with the story that you're telling? Are you exploring specific themes, specific messaging, specific narratives morals, values, all that stuff, especially following a quote unquote bad guy character. What are the sort of themes and messages that you're trying to incorporate into your story that you hope people take away from, the complete arc of the characters that you're writing?
I think that I think part of it is it's really the concept of idealism versus reality, and what compromises that we as a society, as even as people, have to do when our ideals are challenged. And how do we react to that? Do we double down? Do we try to be more understanding? What path do we take? And how does that change us as a person? And I think a lot of our characters go through this, which is they have this idealized vision of what the world is, and that crashes against hard reality. And their reactions to that drives, it's a motivating factor in decisions that they make and how they confront problems. And I think that resonates with us today, that I think we as people have ideals that we try to live towards, but we also have to deal with reality on a daily basis, so that we are not always we don't always lean toward the better angels of our nature. Sometimes we do actually have to compromise, and sometimes those compromises can be uncomfortable. And we find our characters in the Modus Files coming to grips with that. And again, it's a compelling reason for them to either want to work together, or it just shows different motivations that go into it. So I think really kind of at the heart of it, that's how really the story starts, which is this idealized vision of what the world should be. How does that then get transformed within the reality in which they live? How do those characters grow? How do they continue to act? It also is just a question of sometimes you do need to work together. The overall story of 76 in general has been, if the factions of 76 had worked together at the beginning, they might have been able to survive. But instead, they were all driven by their own selfish interests. We see a lot of that in the Modus Files, but then we also see these different groups come together, find ways to compromise against a greater evil, and that's also, I think, another theme here, which is just because you're a bad guy doesn't mean that everything you do is bad, and it doesn't mean that you can't contribute in a way that can, is good for everyone. So there's a bit of that. I mean, and again, maybe going back to the redemption arc, that means lots of different things to lots of different people. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a redemption arc so much as it's an evolution of the characters and why they make decisions that they make down the road. So and just other themes that we investigate is how do you define the difference between order, chaos, and freedom? Because order doesn't necessarily equal freedom. Chaos doesn't necessarily mean that things are bad. This idea that you don't necessarily have to control everything, and that control in many cases can be bad, and you do need to give people room to grow, and you need to embrace this idea that the government should be by the people, for the people, of the people, the kind of the Hancock message. So that's something else that we've explored. But I think really kind of going back at the end of the day, it is really about the conflict of idealism and what ideals do you actually cling on to versus the ones that you learn to compromise. And in compromising, do you become a better person or do you become a worse person? So yeah. So I mean, I think that's maybe it in a nutshell. There's so many other things that but that's the first thing that really came to mind.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Lawrence McNamara, creator, lead writer, editor, and narrator of the Modus Files, a Fallout story podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow to be notified of future episodes, and consider subscribing to our Patreon for early access to new uploads, to keep episodes ad-free, and to improve the quality and frequency of transmission. Until next time, dear listener, I thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all out there in the wasteland.